reabsorption, now that we've established that we have to have filtration, in order to modify the filtration, you need to do reabsorption and secretion. My kind of usual response about talking about reabsorption and secretion is that you can understand where they occur and why they occur. That's step number one. So reabsorption is going to be, again, most in the proximal convoluted tubule. That's why it has all those microvilli. Why does it occur? It occurs because there are some things that randomly get put in the filtrate that you don't want to excrete. So you take them back in the body. What are the mechanisms? Simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, active transport. You know all of those already, right? What gets moved? It depends. Depends on what your body needs to conserve. Always water, almost always sodium, almost always potassium. The rest of it kind of depends. Depends on what the body needs to hold on to or get rid of. Obviously, if I'm hypernatremic, that means I have too much sodium in my body. Am I going to reabsorb more sodium? No. If I'm overhydrated, well, let's not do that one. That's so, bottom line is, right, if you need it, you'll reabsorb it, assuming the body's working properly. And the mechanisms are the same we talked about all along. Simple diffusion, if it's nonpolar, facilitated diffusion, primary active transport, secondary active transport, whatever. Now, almost all of these compounds that you're moving across are polar and hydrophilic. So that means that they have to be moved across with a carrier protein. So remember protein-ligand interactions, what are our four things? Affinity, saturation, competition.
2 mojitos yesterday, can't remember anything.
Specificity. So you got a carrier, it's specific to something that it moves across. It has a high affinity for that substance that it will move across. If it can transport more than one thing, it will always transport the one that has the highest affinity for. And there is a maximal rate at which it can transport that is dictated by the number of the molecules that are in there. So reabsorption is dependent upon, usually protein carriers. So there is a transport maximum for most things. Now, you will only, I guess I will say it this way, if you exceed that saturation, it is possible to excrete something in the urine. So for example, glucose, for example, under normal conditions you would never find glucose in the urine. So this is your approximate range of blood glucose levels, somewhere between 100 and 200. If you exceed this too much, you can still reabsorb even more. But if for some reason your blood glucose levels were to exceed about 300, that is where we see the transport maximum occur for glucose, meaning that we only have enough glucose transporters in the kidney, in the nephrons, to reabsorb all of the glucose that's in the filtrate if the glucose levels are below 300 milligrams per 100 mils. If it exceeds that, that's called the renal threshold. If it exceeds that, I can't transport any more. So what's it going to do? It's going to be excreted in the urine. So can you have some non-pathological cases where you have glucose in your urine? Sure. If I were to right now just eat a whole bunch of sugar, right, all at once, my blood sugar levels are going to spike above 300, and guess what? There'll be some sugar in my urine because there's a transport maximum. So you would see that glucose excretion wouldn't really occur. You wouldn't start seeing any glucose in the urine until you exceed that threshold. And that threshold is dictated by how fast can this be removed. Now, clearly, over time, if I kept eating more and more and more sugar, my kidneys could respond by putting in more transporters. But under normal homeostatic conditions, that's not going to be the case. So this is what we look at here when we think about whether or not something will be found in the urine. It depends on how much of it can you reabsorb. This reabsorption has a transport maximum rate right here. And you will not see things in the urine until you exceed that threshold. So here, if we're looking at the concentration of glucose in the urine, you're not going to see it until you're above 300 in the blood. Why? Because my kidneys are adapted to reabsorb everything as long as it is below that. But again, because of this property of protein-ligand interaction, we do have to consider